3% to global greenhouse gas emissions.
Right.
So I just want to represent the issue, you know what I'm saying?
Okay, so from an environmental perspective, you can make a consequentialist case for veganism based upon the detrimental effect of animal farming. Is that kind of like the argument? Okay, good. So what's the upshot? What are you trying to change in human behavior?
I think the first thing is to make people aware, and then I don't want to mandate anything. It's just about making people aware, and then they can make more informed decisions. In the same way, at the moment, people are advocating for reducing fossil fuels.
Right.
I think if people need the truth about animal farming, they'll make that shift towards a plant-based diet.
Can we move a little bit?
Okay. Sorry.
Sorry.
Can you come in a bit more closer so it's easier for you? Because he's also had conversations with vegans before, and obviously vegans come from not just a narrative perspective, but they also come with a paradigm. So we wanted to first sort of see what is like your main argument or what you're trying to convince people of. Now, so far from what I've understood, I'm just going to repeat what you're saying because I don't want to straw man you. I just want to try and understand the perspective. So we all have a shared goal of making the environment better, and you went to a conference in which people were talking about all the different ways you can improve the environment, but they were missing food, and food is one of the main sources of emissions which impact the environment. And if we change to a plant-based diet, we could actually reduce the carbon footprint and make the earth essentially better. Is that the crux of the argument?
Pretty much.
Okay, good. That's actually interesting because normally people come from a nutritional perspective. So you don't use the nutritional argument, or you just focus on the environmental argument?
Where I use the nutrition argument is if you need animal products out of necessity, like it's probably certain places in the world, like Alaska, I don't know where you probably need like some meat or something.
Sure.
I'm not trying to say those people should go vegan, but where it's possible and practicable, it's a pretty easy choice to make.
Can I put this on you?
Yeah, of course.
Karen speaking.
It's a pretty easy choice to make. You go to the supermarket, and instead of going for the cow's milk, you go for the oat milk or the soy milk or the cashew milk.
Yeah.
It's quite an easy way, and I find that empowering because we live in a world where people are good at pointing the finger. They go, oh, you're not recycling plastic, or that industry is not moving away from fossil fuels, that politician is bad. But I'm like, sure, campaign for those things, but also do what's in your hands, lead by example.
Yeah.
I think that's a really powerful thing.
So I think there's two different lines of arguments here. Let's stick to the first one, which is the consequentialist one. So if we change the variables, say a place like Australia, where camels are not indigenous, but you used to have Afghans who brought over camels during the British Empire, and they went wild. They started mating, and they've had no natural predators. So in central Australia, where obviously a lot of people cannot travel because it's very hot, there is an abundance of camels. And what people are doing is they're treating them almost like rodents, and camel meat is very cheap. In this localized context, if we use the consequentialist argument, then sacrificing camels and shipping them off to the Middle East and actually just having loads of camel joints would, from an environmentalist, consequentialist point of view, be the morally good thing to do.
Can you explain that? And also, is that hypothetical or is that a real situation? Can you just paint that picture a little bit more?
Sure. It's actually a real case scenario where we have, as you know, species adapt to their environment, and when they adapt to the environment, there's a natural food chain, right? When you introduce a new species into a totally different environment, if it doesn't have any natural predators, it can actually become detrimental to the environment. This is well known historically, right? So with the introduction of camels to Australia, this is actually a real case scenario. It actually happened during the time of the British Empire. So the British were using Afghans as people carrying loads, and the Afghans used to have camels, and these camels then started breeding. So we have a real case scenario. But here, if we change the variables from your perspective, would it be morally right to eat camel meat?
Are the camels being bred into existence for the
No,
same purpose of human consumption?
no, they're not. It's naturally happening. They're overpopulating, and they become like rodents, essentially. They become, if anything, it is detrimental to let them keep growing.
So let me throw it back on you. You think that is an ethical form of consumption?
No, I was asking from your consequentialist point of view, if we change the variables, would you agree with the outcome? I wasn't making a case.
Let me use another example, and maybe we can find some common
Sure,
ground, because
sure.
I'm not sure on that
Sure.
example, and I don't want to say something that I don't know exactly. But like,
Sure.
there's a place in Sussex in the UK where there's conservation grazing, and then they produce a little bit of meat because these animals are part of like rewilding the earth, and nobody can argue that it's a really biodiverse area, and these livestock play a really important role in terms of developing the ecosystem.
Right.
I think that meat is sustainable. It's sustainably sourced. However, the issue is that's not a production system. It produces such a small amount of meat that people use that as a halo effect to justify all forms of animal product consumption. So we might find little places in the world where it can be sustainable and then therefore maybe ethical from your standpoint. I don't think it's necessarily ethical.
No,
but I'm saying like that's more of a distraction to the real issues that we got in terms of this industry.
So the point of an example is to actually lay out a few variables from which we can take your argument of the consequentialist sort of argument and see what the outputs are. So it's just a very simple thing. A squared plus B squared is C squared. Okay, if we change A, we change B, we're going to get a different C, right? We're going to get a different answer. So all I was trying to understand is the example in Sussex, from the way you've described it, it sounds like it would be morally wrong or morally maybe even neutral to have that meat, right, and to actually consume that meat. But the example I gave was from the perspective of the environment in Australia, where actually there is a massive overproduction, and it's not natural. It's not non-natural. It's not happening by human beings. It's happening naturally, and because of this, it's having a detrimental impact on the environment. And there's all this excessive meat. Now, if we were to say, well, those people shouldn't be eating those camels, and they would be taking their calories from, say, plant-based diets, then they would be increasing the carbon footprint rather than going for the free calories they can be getting from meat, and at the same time making the environment better. So what I was trying to understand is it the case that you believe in a consequentialist perspective for non-meat based diets, or is there something more to it? Is it like a belief, a worldview that you have?
I think like if that situation you think is sustainable to eat those animal products there, then I don't know the situation, but I'll take your word. Like, yeah, maybe you can do that sustainably there. How is that animal in terms of the ethical? I feel like we're transitioning a little bit, and you maybe want to move gears a little bit. I'm not that confident talking about the ethics. I know lots of people that are. I'm vegan. Do you know the definition of veganism?
No.
The definition of veganism is to reduce suffering as much as possible and practicable. And I think deep down everybody wants that. If you can find situations where like we're helping animals, then maybe that's different. But I think, like I said, in Alaska, if you live there and you need an egg a year or something, then you can still class yourself as a vegan. But I'm saying in this day and age in a city, it's so easy 3 times a day to just go from animal to plant, from cruelty to ethical, to unsustainable to more regenerative.
Yeah.
And it's that simple. But I'm sure there are loopholes in there, situations where that doesn't exist. For example, mussels don't have a central nervous system. Mussels aren't vegan, but there's not really that much harm that you cause to like mussels, right? Because they don't have a central nervous system. So there are outliers, but it doesn't change the overall like paradigm that I care about, which is to reduce suffering as much as possible.
Yeah, I think there's a few things being conflated here. So one is about suffering, right? So reducing suffering is something good. I don't think anybody disagrees with that. But then to make the argument from that to, in a case where it's better for the environment overall, because remember in the beginning you made an argument about the planet, in which case eating meat would be better for the environment than not eating meat, then there's too many, there's too many layers which need to be separated out. It sounds like you're not making a consequentialist argument, you're making an argument from a categorical point of view that reducing suffering is categorically good, and therefore we shouldn't be eating meat, essentially. It sounds like it's not a consequentialist argument. Would you agree with that?
Can you explain the consequentialist argument a little bit more?
So the consequentialist argument would be that we look at the consequences of an action to decide whether it's morally right or wrong for us to impart upon that action. That's a consequentialist point of view. But a categorical point of view is basically saying this is wrong, period. It doesn't matter about the consequences, whether the consequences are negative or positive. So you're switching between the two, and I'm trying to understand, is it that you believe in a consequentialist argument as a veneer underneath which there is a categorical argument, or is it the case that maybe you haven't thought about these things in a more clearer way?
Yeah, I don't know if they're mutually exclusive, to be honest. I'm a little bit confused as to, I think there's a little bit of overlap, perhaps.
Okay, so do you see a contradiction in a consequentialist and a categorical argument being made for the same point?
In what context?
Okay, so if somebody says doing action X is going to lead to more carbon emissions, therefore we shouldn't do action X. That's a consequentialist argument. The flip of that is not doing action X is going to reduce the carbon footprint, therefore not doing action X is the morally good thing to do. That's a consequentialist argument, right?
Right.
A categorical argument would be, we do not do X regardless. We don't care. So these are two different lines of argument, and it sounds like you were making the first one, but it sounds like you're open to the idea of consuming meat under certain contexts. So I'm not sure whether you are fully subscribed to the categorical argument or the consequentialist argument.
I think maybe the consequentialist.
Okay, fine.
I was going to say that
Fine,
as well.
fine. So with the consequentialist,
But that we're talking about, like, I feel like you're mixing up a few things as well, because there's sustainability of it, and of meat eating. And there are probably some situations where, as I've described, it can be sustainable to eat meat. Maybe just some situations here and there, but they're not part of a livestock production system. And so they're very different from
so
the
say that again, the life production
So
system?
at the moment, you've got livestock farming, yeah? And I've got a banner that says, like, livestock farming can never be sustainable. Now, people refute that because they say in certain situations in Australia, wherever it is, in Sussex, you can produce meat sustainably.
No, so-
but I'm saying that's not part of the production system.
Yeah, so sorry, I think you misunderstood what I was saying. I didn't say meat was being produced sustainably in Australia. I said it was actually unsustainable because they were having a negative impact on the environment. Now, if you imagine, we let these camels just go wild over the next 1,000 years or whatever, the amount of emissions are going to increase in the earth. And the amount of impact on the flora and the fauna of Australia is going to be negatively impacted, which is why not only camels, but also kangaroos are seen as rodents as well in Australia. I'm not sure if you know about this one. But since we were talking about contexts within which it may be morally right to eat meat, there's something me and Ali were speaking about before, and this is something which I haven't seen vegans speak about. It was actually an incident where a woman was putting her child under a vegan diet, which she probably thought...
It was actually a baby, 18 months.
18-month baby, right? And it led to malnutrition and the child died, right? So in certain contexts, wouldn't you say it's the morally good thing to do to encourage people to not put their children on these types of diets? Because I don't believe in Darwinism, but from a purely naturalistic point of view, they would say, well, we evolved under these conditions to be eating meat, and it's actually, they would make that argument that it's actually beneficial for the human being. Now, I believe in a different type of argument, but would you, in these cases, like in this case of this baby, would you say that veganism is detrimental to human health?
So the largest dietetic associations in the world, British Dietetic Association, American Dietetic Association, NHS, these bodies say that if you plan a plant-based diet appropriately and healthfully, you can survive and thrive on a plant-based diet.
But how many people can do that? Because we look at the financial situation as well. How many people can do that? Because, for example, I'll be honest with you, like, I try my best to eat healthy. So I go to certain places, and believe me, it's so expensive. It's expensive. I do oat milk. I don't dairy milk. I try to stay, which is personal. Yeah. So I'm on your side on this one. Yeah. But the thing is, it's expensive. So how many people can sustain that kind of lifestyle?
There's a couple of different ways of looking at that. So if you look at like the cheapest foods on the planet are actually the healthiest. They're also the cheapest. So starches, grains, legumes, rice and beans. Now, when it comes to expensive vegan foods, you're talking about like burgers.
Oh, sorry.
You don't need to consume those.
Yeah, so sorry, just to intervene there. I recently went to Mongolia. Mongolia is a huge country with 3 million population. the environment doesn't actually make it sustainable for the population to be eating plant-based diet. They rely heavily upon meat. In fact, I was shocked when I was there because they eat meat every single day, at least 2-3 times. Like 2 of their meals at least have meat in them. So they have actually adapted themselves to be living with yogurt and milk and protein, mainly red meat, not even white meat like fish and chicken and stuff. So if they were to go under what you just said right now, that they were to take this guideline that actually the plant-based diet is sustainable and you could actually live on it comfortably, they would say, well, our history proves the opposite. Our history proves that one of the reasons that they were able to even expand out as an empire is because they didn't have to rely so much on farming and this type of thing, and the environment didn't suit it. Because this very cold country, I went to this area called Hoft, which is like -33 in the winter. Extreme cold, and they don't have fridges. They sacrifice a cow or a camel or whatever, and they just stick it out in the shed, and it's frozen throughout the year. They bring it out, they cut it, and they eat it. So again, from a consequentialist point of view, it'll be morally right for them to promote a meat-based diet as opposed to a plant-based diet.
Yeah, like I said at the beginning, if you're in a situation where you need meat out of necessity, then yeah, I'm not got any issue with that.
So it's consequentially saying it's alright.
But I'm
do you have
saying
any pets?
on the point though, that's often used as a framework to then undermine plant-based living and veganism in a situation where it's very easy and a sustainable thing to do that.
Yeah, I didn't make that argument. I think that would be fallacious. Yeah. I would agree with you. If somebody wants to live a plant-based diet and someone was to use these examples, you couldn't disqualify their worldview using this. What you could disqualify is if somebody says, this is overall the best way to live. You can challenge that through these types of examples. Yeah, that would be the difference.
You can be a Muslim vegan, by the way.
So does he say you can be vegan?
There is nothing that stipulates that says you have to have meat.
So it's a choice, right?
Yeah. It's something that is not stipulated where if you don't have a meat, you're not a good Muslim. It's not. But for example, do you have pets?
No.
Okay, if you was to have a pet, like let's say a dog or a cat, would you give it meat or what would you give it?
Well, it's interesting. There's like some debate on this at the moment. Like with dogs, they're omnivores, but they can thrive on a plant-based diet. And there's actually research coming out saying it's a lot healthier. For cats, they're not. No.
Okay, so for cats can't, but dogs can. So imagine you had a cat. Would you go and buy meat for it? Like, and would your group or like this what movement you're with, would they be okay with you, or would you be like, I'm not going to have a cat totally?
I know vegans that have snakes from when they're back in the day before they were vegan, and yeah, like, absolutely they feed the snakes and mice and stuff. So, yeah.
Okay, so would that be ethically correct to your worldview that if you had a kitten that you would have to, or a cat, you would have to go as a vegan and buy the meat, and would you morally would you not feel like?
Yeah, but it's pet ownership's a bit of an interesting one because vegans are against that. Animals are here with us, not for us. And with pets, it's a strange relationship that we've created. But if you're in a situation where before you've gone vegan, you have the pet, and of course, common sense dictates you just keep it, then yeah, nobody's going to argue with the fact you have to buy it.
So as a vegan, would you advise the followers of this movement to not have like pets?
Yeah.
Really? Okay, so
Good to see you. Come in.
One other question I quickly wanted to ask, just so you guys carry on. You know, when we talked about Australia and we talked about, for example, there's excessive camels, etc. How would you, because you said the definition of veganism is
You got here okay?
the harm.
You got here okay?
How would you deal with the excessive amount of camels? How would you not slaughter them, but how would you? I don't say get rid of them.
Reduce their impact on the environment because they're rodents.
So let's say this specific scenario, yeah? So there's a lot of camels, you said there's no predators, therefore they're like rodents, yeah? So how, as a vegan, would you deal with that situation? Yeah. How would you slaughter them? Well, not slaughter, I don't want to, like, what would you do to population control?
I have no idea. If that situation happened in the UK, I would maybe repurpose the subsidies. At the moment, we have a subsidy system where most grazing livestock farming systems wouldn't even be sustainable without being propped up by government. So I'd maybe say in those situations, let's repurpose the subsidies and use that to look after the land and the animals and let them die out naturally.
But they're not going to. Sorry, right, just to continue what you're explaining here, Ali. He gave you an example, and if you change the variables of the example, there's no point in giving that example. So the example he's giving there is of a natural situation where there's a massive overpopulation problem that's very different to being here where we can subsidize or some sort of policies to reduce the production of these animals. So I think it's better to stick to the example being given rather than change it.
I have no idea. Is the answer, and it's a boring
Like
answer.
if I was a vegan, I would have to slaughter it. Because looking at because you talked about veganism definition. What's the definition of veganism?
It's the minimization of harm as much as possible.
Well,
practice.
so I'm going to look at these camels and be like, the fact they're overpopulated is a harm to themselves, to the environment,
Yeah.
and we would have to slaughter. If there are let's say 5 million, we're going to drop to 2.5 million, we're going to have to slaughter them.
Right.
And not only that, I would want to benefit society as well and send it to people who they don't have nothing to eat. So that's what I would do as a vegan, because if I use that principle.
Yeah.
So I would have to use it and be like, what's the lesser of harm? There's so many of them, okay, yes, we want less of harm, we don't want to do this, but we have no choice. So if you have to take the consequential bold view, you would have to slaughter them.
Yeah, and you know,
Unless you disagree with
yeah,
me, like-
yeah. No, that makes perfect sense. But you know, we were talking earlier about Mongolia, and just to stick to the example about what's better for human beings. So my friend here, he's actually got Mongol blood. So you can probably tell
As you can see,
this specimen.
Abdul Wahab.
Nice to meet you, sir.
So you know, if you were to go to Mongolia and you'd come across specimens like this, right? Probably this height as well.
I would do a U-turn.
I'll do a U-turn, right? But if somebody was to make a, say, as a vegan, you were to go to Ulaanbaatar and you were to speak there to the Mongol people, and you were to make these arguments, from a purely consequentialist point of view, you would fail. You'd have to use an argument from a categorical point of view, not consequentialist point of view. So how would you do it? How would you convince someone like him, who obviously loves eating meat, like why not to eat meat and why to eat plant-based diet?
I wouldn't.
You wouldn't? Okay.
I wouldn't.
Okay.
But if I'm meeting him on the streets of London, I'd say, where do you live? Are you here for a week, or do you live here?
No, I'm from LA, so I'm just visiting.
Oh, you're just visiting. Cool. And I would say, did he know that a plant-based diet can do X, Y, and Z? If he then says, I'm going back home in a certain situation, I wouldn't make that argument. I'd just stay away from it.
Okay.
And it's a boring debate topic for you, because I know
usually
you're
Right.
the vegans that I've
sparring.
met are categorical. Like the vegans that I've met before, it's quite interesting. 'cause
Yeah, you're quite balanced.
Yeah, some of them are just categorical. Like, no, at all.
I don't think we
costs.
disagree on much.
I think we agree on much because you're consequentialist and saying if this happens, we can do.
Yeah,
So
yeah. Some of the vegans are a bit, I would say, extreme, because they would say under any circumstances, eating meat is immoral. So you're definitely not making
That's
that
in the
argument.
context of their world, and that's true, you know?
What do you mean? I don't
Well,
understand.
they're talking about this from a common sense point of view in their world, in their life, and everybody they've met around them, in 99+% of the population around the world. So, you know, it does hold true most of the time. Like, we can pick these outlier events.
No, but-
they're not common.
But there's a problem here. They're making a categorical argument and they're going by, say, 99%, if 99% was correct. And it's not. I have some evidence to show that it's not correct. But that wouldn't be a categorical argument. That would be a consequentialist argument. Now, when it comes to a place like Mongolia, or say East Africa, a place like, say, Somalia. Somalia, you don't have a lot of vegetation, but people eat a lot of lamb. And they're herders and they rely a lot on livestock, right? From their perspective and the perspective of the Mongols, and I would say the perspective of a lot of people not in the first world, a plant-based diet is not the most nutritional thing and the most economical thing that you can do from a consequentialist point of view. Maybe this is just for the Western world, a plant-based diet. You know, it doesn't. If you were to go to, say, a place like Nepal, a place like Philippines, you know,
Traditionally very plant-based when they're a lot healthier.
well, you would find actually people, they rely heavily upon animals and milk, and like milk is
So
such.
my
Yeah.
understanding of it, is there are some situations where you are right.